Sometimes we ask, does Seventh-day Adventist education make a difference? Does attending an Adventist school, college, or university provide something more than attending any other good educational institution? Is what I pay for Adventist education an expense or an investment? Pastors and church leaders sometimes wonder, is Adventist education truly evangelism? Does it result in spiritual development? And if it does, how can we convey this to parents and other church members in a clear and persuasive way? We begin with an affirmation. Adventist education is the longest and largest evangelistic event in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. First, in terms of duration. Depending on the country and the educational level, a student may be involved with education 5 to 9 hours a day, 160 to 260 days per year, and perhaps for 1 or more years in an Adventist school. At minimum, if a student attends an Adventist school for just a single year, this represents an evangelistic opportunity of at least 800 hours. To use evangelistic terminology, this equates to a person attending an evangelistic series 2 hours per evening for 400 nights. If a student, however, continues in Adventist education from first grade through university studies, the evangelistic potential could increase to more than 37,000 hours. Clearly, the longest evangelistic endeavor of the church. In Adventist education, over 6,600 evangelistic sites specialize in children 5 to 12 years old, with more than 53,000 evangelists and about 1.2 million persons attending each day. Over 2,700 evangelistic sites focus on adolescents 13 to 16 years old, with more than 42,000 evangelists and over 630,000 in attendance. For youth and young adults, there are 155 evangelistic venues, with more than 15,000 evangelists and about 170,000 attending. All told, Adventist education represents more than 9,000 evangelistic sites, with more than 111,000 evangelists involved and over 2 million attending each day. Certainly, it is the largest evangelistic endeavor of the church. We can therefore affirm that Seventh-day Adventist education is indeed the longest and the largest evangelistic event of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But is it effective? The Cognitive Genesis study looked at factors that contributed to the success of students in Adventist education. It was a study that took place over a 3-year period. More than 800 schools participated, with 52,000 students in grades 3 through 9 and in grade 11. Results from the study indicated that students in Seventh-day Adventist schools surpassed the national average on standardized tests in all subject areas, for all grade levels, and for all school sizes. And furthermore, regardless of ability level. There was something else. as the number of years in an Adventist school increased. The difference between those who attended Adventist schools and the national average, represented by the 50th percentile, became more pronounced, both in terms of achievement as well as ability. Another significant result was graduation rate. In general, 82% of students nationwide graduate from high school, whereas in Adventist education, the graduation rate was greater than 98%, and of these, 91% plan to attend higher education. Given results such as these, Martin Doblmeier, a well-known documentary filmmaker, created a public television documentary, The Blueprint, that tells the story of Seventh-day Adventist education, and that analyzes the factors that contribute to its outstanding success. Clearly, the academic result is impressive. However, this is not the most important result. Scripture reminds us, what will you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Writing to church leaders and educators, Ellen White declared that the all-important matter is the conversion of the student. In the biblical model, conversion is expressed through baptism, a public statement of one's decision to formally join the church. We turn first to the matter of accession, of joining the church. Is there evidence for the role of Adventist education? In terms of baptisms that directly result from Adventist education, through a week of prayer, through the ministry of teachers, or the work of a chaplain, we find over a 10-year period that these range from about 40,000 to 50,000 per year. In all, over 460,000 baptisms. This is equivalent to a typical size conference being established each year through the evangelistic ministry of Adventist education. While only a few studies have compared attendance at Adventist schools with the baptismal rate of children from Adventist families, those that have examined this connection concluded that Adventist education does make a significant difference in terms of children and youth joining the church. One of these studies was conducted in the Southern Union in the United States and involved 844 participants, children from Seventh-day Adventist families. It studied those who had received no Adventist education, those who had received 1 or more years of Adventist education, and those who received 11 or more years of Seventh-day Adventist education. Then it compared the proportion of those who had been baptized and those who had never been baptized. For those with no Adventist education, close to 60% had joined the church. Approximately 85% of those with 1 or more years of Adventist education joined, while in the group with 11 or more years Adventist education, over 96% joined the church. To consider the other side of the equation, if we compare those with 11 or more years of Adventist education with those who had no Adventist education, the children from Adventist families were 13 times more likely to have never joined the church when they received no Adventist education. Another study conducted in the Lake Union of the North American Division examined 807 participants, children from Seventh-day Adventist families. Again, it compared those with no Adventist education, some Adventist education, and those who had received, in this case, 12 years of Adventist education, both elementary and secondary. Then it looked at those who had joined the church and those who had never joined. For those with no Adventist education, close to 62% joined. Those with some Adventist education, 95% joined. While 100% of those, in this case, with 12 years of Adventist education, joined the church. Again, significant differences. Or to look at it another way, those who had never been baptized had on average 2.4 years of Adventist education, whereas those who had been baptized had received on average 8 years of Adventist education. Perhaps this is why Ellen White wrote, "The work of education and the work of redemption are one." Adventist education is mission, and we must reaffirm and uplift the central role of Adventist education in the evangelistic mission of the church. We now turn to the second matter, the matter of retention. They join the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but do they remain in the Adventist Church? The matter of members who leave is troubling. Over a 50-year period, starting in 1965, for example, more than 34 million people joined the Adventist Church worldwide. Of these, 20.6 million members remained in the church, while 13.7 million left. The net loss rate is close to 40%. In essence, of every 10 members, 6 remained, while sadly 4 slipped away. And the situation is not improving. Limiting the data to a more recent period, the years 2000 to 2012, the net loss rate was over 43%. And what about young people? The Youth Retention Study was a landmark study that involved more than 1,500 young people, 15 to 16 years old, when they began their participation in the study. The study was representative of Seventh-day Adventist youth, large and small churches, urban and rural regions, and representing ethnic diversity. These young people were interviewed each year for the next 10 years. One of the key questions addressed by the study was how many had left the church by their mid-20s. Sadly, in many demographic groups, that percentage approached 50%. So we are losing not just 1 out of 10 coins, as Jesus described in the parable. We are losing half of the coins. Perhaps that is why the prophet Jeremiah asked, "Where is the flock that was entrusted to you, your beautiful flock?" Over the past 3 decades, there have been at least 7 studies that have examined the role of Adventist education in retention, with 3 of these studies conducted quite recently. Some of these studies have focused on specific regional populations, while others are more global in nature. Some present a snapshot in time, while others have taken a longitudinal approach. While each study has inherent limitations, as is the case with all studies, together they present a picture that is consistent over time and compelling. The first two of these studies were large, multi-year studies. The Value Genesis study was conducted first in 1990, then Value Genesis 2 in the year 2000, and Value Genesis 3 in 2010. The Youth Retention Study, as we have mentioned, followed Seventh-day Adventist youth over a 10-year period. Then we have 3 studies that were doctoral dissertations. These studies examine children and youth in 3 different settings. Finally, there have been more recently 2 global studies. One of these was a qualitative study involving interviews, while the other a more quantitative study. We will highlight results from each of these studies. First, the Value Genesis study, spanning 20 years. This study examined data from over 2,200 12th grade Seventh-day Adventist students. Results showed that the more years of Adventist education, the greater the person's reported loyalty to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The greater their belief in the fundamental teachings of the Church, as well as their intention to remain a Seventh-day Adventist at age 40. This study also examined factors related to the development of religious faith. Of these, the most important factor was attending a Seventh-day Adventist school. In fact, 81% of all students indicated that attending an Adventist school is the most important thing that has helped me develop my religious faith. The Youth Retention Study, as we have noted, tracked Seventh-day Adventist young people beginning at age 15 and 16 and following those same individuals for the next 10 years. One of the key findings of this research was that the number of years in an Adventist school was positively related to commitment to Jesus Christ and commitment to personal Bible study, as well as to the statements, "My relationship with Christ is stronger now, and religion is important in my life." All of which are outcomes that we want to see in a young person's life. Outcomes that are strengthened through Adventist education. We turn now to several doctoral dissertations that studied retention in the context of Adventist education. Jim Epperson's study, as we earlier noted, focused on young people in the Southern Union who had received no Adventist education, 1 or more years Adventist education, and 11 or more years Adventist education. It then looked at the matter of church attendance, whether that was regular or infrequent or no church attendance. Those with no Adventist education, 58%, attended church regularly. Those with 1 or more years of Adventist education, 79% attended church regularly. And those with 11 or more years of Adventist education, more than 90% attended church regularly. In essence, children of Adventist families with no Adventist education were 4.5 times more likely to have infrequent or no church attendance compared with those who had 11 years or more of Adventist education. This is significant because when people become inactive in the church, they tend to leave the Adventist church. Robert Rice conducted a study in which he compared youth from Adventist families in Southern California who had graduated from public high schools and those who graduated from Adventist academies. He followed these young people for a 13-year period. He then examined whether these individuals 13 years later had been baptized and were still attending, were a member but no longer attending, were no longer a member, or had never been baptized. For these young people from Seventh-day Adventist families who had graduated from a public high school, only 37% had been baptized and were still attending 13 years later, while 7% were a member but no longer attending. Tragically, 38% had been baptized but were no longer a member, and 18% had never been baptized. For those who had graduated from a Seventh-day Adventist academy, however, 77% had been baptized and were attending 13 years after graduation. 5% were a member and no longer attending, 13% were no longer a member, and 6% had never been baptized. In essence, young people were twice as likely to stay in the Seventh-day Adventist Church 13 years later if they had graduated from a Seventh-day Adventist academy. Or to group the data another way, 63% of the young people from Adventist families who had graduated from a public high school were no longer involved with the Seventh-day Adventist Church 13 years later, compared with 23% of the young people who graduated from a Seventh-day Adventist academy. The study also examined the matter of those who married a Seventh-day Adventist. For those from Adventist families who had graduated from a public high school, only 27% married a Seventh-day Adventist, whereas 78% of the graduates from Adventist academies married a Seventh-day Adventist. 3 times more likely to marry an Adventist if they had graduated from an Adventist academy. Warren Minder's study, conducted in the Lake Union, also considered retention. As we have noted, the study looked at those children from Seventh-day Adventist families who had received no Adventist education, some Adventist education, or 12 years, both elementary and secondary, in Seventh-day Adventist schools. Then it considered not just those who had been baptized, but those who had been baptized and remained in the church. In the group of those children from Adventist families with no Adventist education, about 50% joined and remained as young adults. About 11% joined and then left the church, and 38% had never joined. Of those with some Adventist education, nearly 79% joined and remained in the church as young adults. 16% joined but subsequently left, and about 5% had never joined. Of those who had been educated in Adventist schools throughout elementary and secondary for the full 12 years, 98% not only joined but remained in the Seventh-day Adventist Church as young adults. Only about 2% had joined and then left. Again, substantial differences in terms of retention in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The Center for Creative Ministry more recently conducted a global qualitative study in which 925 former or inactive church members were interviewed. Findings indicate that only 17% of lapsed and ex-members had received any form of Adventist education, compared to 56% in those who were current members. The difference between these groups is significant. 3 times more likely to have attended Adventist education among those who remained as members of the Adventist Church. This difference provides evidence that those who have not experienced Adventist education are disproportionately more likely to become inactive or leave. The final study that we will consider was conducted in 2013 and 2014 by the General Conference Office of Archives, Statistics, and Research. It was a global study encompassing 9 out of the 13 world divisions. Among other matters, it compared those who were members of the church currently and those who were no longer members in terms of whether they had attended Adventist education or other education at 3 different levels: elementary, secondary, and tertiary education. Current members were twice as likely to have Seventh-day Adventist tertiary education compared to ex-members who had studied at the tertiary level. Current members were 2.5 times as likely to have studied in an Adventist school at the secondary level compared to ex-members. Finally, current members were 3 times as likely to have studied in an Adventist elementary school compared to ex-members. These differences should not surprise us. While there are important relationships between retention and Adventist education in each educational level, the strongest relationship is found in the earliest years, suggesting that early Adventist education is an especially powerful factor in retention. We return to the key question. Are the accession and the retention of children and youth in the church associated with their participation in Adventist education? Based on the evidence, the answer to that question is certainly. There is a consistent and persuasive relationship between attending a Seventh-day Adventist school and the likelihood of that child or youth joining and then choosing to remain in the Seventh-day Adventist church. And this is true for different times, in different places, and in different populations. Perhaps that is why Scripture tells us, train up a child in the way he should go. In essence, Adventist education is mission. Through Seventh-day Adventist education, children and youth experience joining the church. They also remain in the church. All of this for the purpose of redemption. As Ellen White observed, in the highest sense, the work of education and the work of redemption are one. Adventist education makes a difference. Not only does it effectively prepare children and youth in the sciences, in language, history, and technology, it views each student as a candidate of heaven. Adventist education does make a difference. Adventist education educates for eternity.